How about some more wrap-ups and expansions having to do with wet brain, dry brain exploration? A couple of fairly well-known areas that even I've touched on in other ways that continue to pop up inside of the life of man thousands of years ago and right today. One of them being this common old expression, said sometimes with some passion and with seeming importance, and at other times it's just a throwaway line that people continue to repeat and do not really notice. But the line is that words just seem inadequate. I can't really seem to say what I feel, is one of the more common ones. Now, I'm not referring to even the ways that I lapse into it while warning you otherwise. I'm not speaking now of someone attempting to, as they might call it, convey some so-called otherworldly or metaphysical or drug-related experience, like I don't know what to tell you. Just everyday affairs that people continually say that I just can't find the words to tell you what I am feeling, thinking, experiencing. I wanted you to try and consider again a certain overlooked peculiarity about this, because that is not quite correct. When people say words are inadequate, let me be a little more specific, because out in the ordinary world, life might even make some ordinary people be more specific. Of course, you just need to stay out of their way, not wear your good clothes. But they would say such things as this. As I said, to be a little more specific, that words are inadequate, just inadequate to express myself presently, to express myself. I cannot convey to you in words. That is not quite correct, but in a peculiar way. Now let me show you, should be easy to see once I begin to point it out, that there are quite valid everyday areas wherein this proclamation collapses. Words are absolutely adequate to convey to someone, God damn, I got a headache. Jesus. Or my stomach. Or to express specific anger, to tell someone, I am so mad at so-and-so, figuratively, I could kill the mother. Am I not correct? And no one stops. You have never, no human has ever been standing around and going, God, ooh, and have one of these and say, maybe another person even solicits. Fool that they were, like, is something wrong? No human has ever gone, and they're wanting to say, God, I got a headache, you know, that would give Abraham the cramps. They want to, but nobody says, well, words are not adequate to tell you what I'm expressing. Because they will. They can lapse into my kind of jargon and say things like, you know, I got a headache that would, you know, make Abraham curse. No one ever says, Jesus, I got the world's worst headache, and then go, well, that doesn't adequately cover it. Because if they were going to say that and didn't think it would, they would just simply fall back upon additional adjectives, which is the American way, and say, Jesus, I got the world's worst goddamn headache, or something like that. But you get through without whatever you're wired up. No one says, well, that didn't express it. No one ever feels that. Or if you're expressing specific, what seems to be emotion, like, oh, I hate that person. Right now it's really specifics, but over some instance, not just I'm angry in general. Not that you're just wired up to be sort of a floating, hostile gunslinger through life. But in specific areas that I am so mad I could kill. If I thought I could get away with it, never mind morality, I believe I would kill that son of a gun. Or, even when it's specific, having to do with something a little on the other side of, I believe I would probably cut off my right arm to get her in bed once. Now, even though that sounds pretty colloquial, If two guys are sitting around, or two women doing your own version, which we don't want to think about, but no guy has ever said, once he has taken his poetic license, and say, Jesus, I believe, cut off my right arm to get her in bed. Men say things like that when they're younger. But no man has ever said, well, wait a minute, that doesn't cover it. Hell yeah, that covers it, even though it is poetic license, they both understand it, to say that I would cut off my arm to get her. Nobody else says, are you sure that you're adequately expressing your feelings? Everybody's satisfied, but specifically the person saying it. The peculiarity, that's enough fun. Now back to serious stuff. The peculiarity. What men are driven to say, what they are actually referring to when they say that words cannot adequately convey, I cannot express myself presently, there are no words, I just can't do it. The peculiar thing is this, what they're referring to is thought. And the real peculiarity is thought, where you could look at speech as being the natural outcome of thought. You could look at speech as being one of the primary servants, aspects, manifestations of thinking. They're just almost one and the same. There's no, here we go, adequate three-dimensional words. They're almost the same thing. So the one area, the thing that talk, without which there would be no talk, that is thought. The higher end of the nervous system, the cortical intellect, my yellow circuits. There would be no talk were it not for that. You see the peculiar part as I was calling it. Then speech, now the one thing, even though it does not define it and does not separate it in this way, the one thing that it is actually referring to when your speech, when any human speech says, well, words cannot adequately express, I can't express myself verbally right now. What you're really saying is I cannot express what I am thinking. And it's the very thing, that is the very nervous system manifestation and operation, that is so-called thinking, that fuels speech. If you do not have thinking, if all you had, if we could divide up again arbitrarily into my red and blue circuits, or the motor and limbic circuits of the human nervous system, if you had everything operating in you except the cortical intellect, you do know you would not be talking. And you could say, well, it's only that part of the brain that makes you talk. Yeah, all right. Don't pull physiology on me. Get past that. Just for a second. Just for a second. A moment. If it were not for the intellect, if this thing could talk, the way things stand now, it would have nothing to say. All right? I'm not sure all of you heard that, or any of you. If your tongue and everything, the whole operation could talk, and you did not have yellow circuits operating, the cortical intellect operating, anything below the cortical intellect, if that was the only fuel, if that was the only reference point, your tongue would never have occasion to move. The motor systems, the limbic system, simply would never talk. And so the one thing that is a prerequisite, or for those of you in New Jersey and other places insist on super speak, absolute prerequisite for speech is thought, is thinking. And now speech is saying, I cannot express myself. There are just no words to express myself right now. It's only referring to this. It's not referring to the other things. Because you can express yourself adequately, there is no question. People are not disturbed that they or feel that there's any lack of being able to express themselves verbally if it is about the way they physically feel or about the way they emotionally feel. It's here. You do not find that peculiar? All right, if you're not going to find it peculiar, I'll just go on anyway. I was going to point out that there is still the dynamics involved of the wet and dry brain structure, as I've been calling it. And that is that you have the dry brain having a continual awareness that it has not yet begun to adequately cover the continual churning, the tacit activities going on down in this wet, chemical, nonverbal sphere. And it comes out with people quite seriously. You've all done it. That I just I can't express myself. What it is that I'm trying, there is an importance here. It is not me pointing out some faux pas that man is making rhetorically or socially in his use of language. It is again tied into the evolutionary dance, kind of a snake dance, this kind of serpentine, Byzantine, Rococo movement of evolution, wherein men are continually driven through certain energies to do, but specifically to say, and of course to think certain things that seem to point in some specific direction. And many times at a specific location, and says, all right, this is either true or not true, or this is what is happening to me in humanity, or this is not what's happening, and it should be happening. Whereas if you can see it from what would amount to a more complex direction, from a more complex view, the very things it's talking about are not so by its own definitions, by its own game plan, by the rules of its own operation. Just continual is why oftentimes it pops up even amongst ordinary thought ways, thought processes with people, and that I have at least allowed Kyroot to point out to you, no, I did it. I beat him to it once. That ultimately everything, at least once, appears to be ironic. It can't be otherwise. Everything, no matter how simplistic, no matter how innocuous it may have started out, or no matter how complex it may seem, no matter how straightforward and unquestionable may appear to be the purpose of this thing, this idea, this operation, this activity, at least at one time, to everybody, if you look at it long enough and carefully enough, its operations are going to appear to be, its mere existence is going to appear to be ironic. But there's the reason. Or one way to look at the reason is you have this thing attempting to talk, and you have this thing, and the more you appear to be educated, the more that you are wired up, inched your time and place to apparently be well-rounded, observant, insightful, glib of tongue, then you are apparently living out a life manifesting what it is that a good, ordinary, perhaps a little out of the ordinary, you hope, young person on the way up intellectually. But you and everyone else are continually confronted, whether you say the words every day or not, you're continually confronted with, there's something I'm wanting to express, and I just can't do it. And those who have taken some notice of this, then it goes off into thousands and thousands of pages and all kinds of mystical tomes and psychological ponderings about what's afoot. Remember, I don't have to draw it again, of me drawing that new kind of version or variation of my old nervous system, and to look upon the wet brain. There is a reality to it, and it's not just the wet brain, but it is the brain's operation biologically, chemically, and there is a kind of separation. It is a continual separation, that is part of a spectrum, but it could be cut if you knew where, but it has been a part of the expansion to where this wet brain that was nonverbal now has turned into what people ordinarily take to be their personality, that which can talk, that which I'm calling the dry brain, and it is almost as though it is a kind of thin atmosphere surrounding the old one. It is a charged kind of atmosphere. It is tied. It cannot float off. The wet brain, we would not even have an awareness were it not for the dry brain and this kind of charged magnetic field around it that talks. But they, from a more enriched view, from a more complex view, they are not the same thing, but you understand they are the same thing. You can't really separate them. If you did, you're not talking about a human anymore, although you can literally do it. You're not talking about a human. So it's not a matter that in some way that you can work on a wet brain or a dry brain, or that the wet brain is better sometimes or the dry brain is better. You're talking about one entity. If you are a functioning, speaking human, you cannot separate them. But the situation is thusly, the one doing the talking under ordinary conditions does not know this. Under ordinary conditions, most dry brains, the way things are wired up on our planet, do not even have any specific awareness, any usable awareness that there is this kind of operational division in their thoughts. Now, I know that ordinary people, fairly run-of-the-mill sophisticated people nowadays, is already into the genetic wiring of humans on this part of the planet to accept that there is a conscious and an unconscious mind. People that never even had psychology in high school. People just accept that. They will say it themselves, not even knowing they could have even a limited knowledge of the name Freud or Jung or somebody, but they will say things to their wife or to somebody. They will excuse their behavior or attempt to explain their behavior by saying, well, I guess unconsciously I wanted to lose that job. It is now part of, is not the environment, is not social pressures, is not educational influences or mistakes. It is now part of the general genetic wiring system, at least on this part of the planet, in large parts of the planet now. So they have that kind of awareness, but it has no operational definition. That is, they find no use for it other than a kind of throwaway line to excuse themselves. Or, in fact, others, they might try to excuse their partner or their son or their husband or wife or somebody. Well, they didn't mean what they said. You shouldn't have got offended because it was just probably an unconscious thing that came out. You know, she always said that you reminded her of her great aunt. People say stuff like that, but it has no operational definition. That is, it does not change the way they think. And they do not understand that there is such a division. It is not, well, not even in need. I was going to, for a second, draw you some parallels between that and which the general Western world thinks of as the difference between conscious and unconscious minds. But I have done that before, and I've done it enough. Back to my picture of what I was telling you. There is no operational, usable knowledge by anyone's wet, dry brain. Things are not wired up, that they have an awareness that I am being fed from the same source as this thing. It is a continual process. If you looked in a three-dimensional manner, like my two-dimensional drawings that I do of the nervous system, and I have said, sort of metaphorically, that you could look at the base of the spine is where you're plugged in, which you're not literally, and that the energy has run up. The growth of the human nervous system has gone up, literally, by a three-dimensional description, up. And it goes higher and higher and higher. Hence, right now, just medical science, physiology, biology, accepts the fact that literally, as it happens, fortuitously you might say, that right at the top of the brain itself is the juiciest part. It is the part that makes men men, that makes man man. It is where we think. All right, there has been that kind of expansion, but it's continuous. It has been in some sort of quantum leaps from being a brute, from being simply a tyrannosaurus that could no longer fly and developed an opposable thumb, or that you were some caveman, Neanderthalic brute that is now turned into a passable disco fiend. It is a continuum, and yet, in the midst of that, there is the way that the wiring system is, the way that life is on this planet, the way the physics are of our existence. Everything appears to be, to ordinary intelligence, appears to be episodic and fragmented. Therefore, humans do not think of themselves as being some sort of continuum. Everyone thinks of themselves all the way, as witnessed by the feeling now, the accepting beyond the feeling as part of the wiring system, as I said, that we have a conscious and unconscious mind, whatever the hell that means. We simply do. People believe that I do things that I don't know why I do them at times. I do them probably because of external pressures beyond my control, and those pressures ought to watch it and give me a break. They believe that. They believe that people operate episodically. They do not see a continuum. If they did in any way see any sort of continuation of themselves from the day that they were first conscious up until today, they would then look at life as being fragmented. They do not see that life itself operates in a continuous spiral, a continuous flow even. Thus the feeling that there are all of these fragmented, isolated pieces of local reality going on. It is the same way that movies are edited. It is the same way that television shows are edited. It's the same way that books are written. You write for a while and then you change paragraphs. When you really get tired, you go to a new chapter. Well, that's the end of that. I'll go into something else. The dry brain does not realize, it's not supposed to realize, that there is a continuum, that it is not really floating off of this sphere. It is not in any way separate from the wet brain. They're running off the same energy. They're inside the same three-dimensional reality and then some. They're operating within the same time zone. But this part talks, the other part doesn't. The part that talks has this crude awareness, always has as long as it's been talking. It's not something new that just came about in the midst by the graces of 20th century psychology. The thing has always had an awareness that what I'm talking about is, if it could have done this, it would say, to tell you the truth, I don't know what I'm talking about. No, don't tell anybody that. Because at one level, from one view now, people do know what they're talking about. They've got to. You and I could not even get by for 65 years on this planet. That finally, it may take you a few times, but you've got to find a mechanic. Somebody to repair your TV or VCR. They all may say, yes, I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm talking about. And finally you find one that just sort of accidentally seems to know. But if the dry brain, the kind of things that makes people, that drives humans to say, I just can't find the words to adequately express myself, what it's saying is, I don't know what I'm talking about. Now, not specifically, not dumb, but what it's saying is, I don't know what's making me talk. Now, if any of you find that strange, I can play dirty pool too, since it's the fall and I feel ratty anyway. It's to ask you again that great question, all of you who think you're really going somewhere with this, is what are you going to say next? Ha ha ha. Of course, some of you thought you were so smart I ought to get dirty if it gets any colder here. You say, all right, what are you going to think next? But never mind. I kick brain folds where they're down. If the dry brain had a certain view, I just wanted you to see it as not a proclamation of that humans would make that I'm dumb, but it would literally. But that sentence, surely some of you hear me, it has at least two interpretations that are easily seen. All of these admissions, all of these proclamations and claims that I can't quite seem to correctly express myself at all times, what it's saying is, and not knowing it, is an abject admission, I don't know what I'm talking about, because it does not know why it's talking, it does not know the formations behind the words, and it knows in a crude way, always has, that what it is saying, when it does seem to be speaking authoritatively in some way, that, well, yes, I know everything there is to know about the late lamented Hudson automobile, or the Munch TV, or I know all there is to know about Tupperware. Now, it can be speaking authoritatively in some field, but the intellect has always known, from the first time that there's any recorded speech of a man somewhere, they have known, the intellect knows in a crude way, that what I am saying and what seems to be behind whatever it is, but what's making me talk, the kinds of stuff I'm trying to talk about, it has this crude awareness, it cannot begin to say it, but it's this awareness like, Jesus, I'll never get around to cataloging all this. I'll never get around to being able to note everything going on in me. Never! I mean, it's a madhouse. Thus, I can't seem to adequately express myself at this time, which is neat to say at this moment or under these conditions, or for men at other times to believe that the spirits, the titans and the gods came into men, sometimes capriciously, but they were always there. There were voices that talked to people. Then it stopped being voices, and then it became one's own mind. Then it got a little refined. It's not just my brain, just not my own mind. Sometimes it's my unconscious mind, and it talks in symbols, and it talks to me at night and in dreams, and God knows what all's going in me. It's just a unspecified cornucopia of thrills. Well, I was trying to think of something to say other than repeat it's a madhouse in here, but that's the way people, without knowing it, that's the way the dry brain has a non-specified, non-verbal survey of this. There is another aspect of this. People throughout history, in case some of you think this is new, have been saying words to this effect. I can just about wrap it up historically, at least in the Western world. They have said and written thoughts along these lines, that there are certain circumstantial pressures in our life that causes man to develop a kind of artificial shell that's normally referred to as one's personality, one's ego, one's individuality. That has been going on, surely some of you know, just pick out the Greeks if you want to start. You got good written, hard evidence that the Greeks, lamenting, philosophizing about this, and people are doing it right today. Psychologists, all kinds of would-be mystics, just everyday people, that there is a kind of artificiality about one's, let's just call it personality, is what most people call it nowadays. The persona, as the Greeks originally used it, that mask that they used in the dramas, that it was not the person, it's to show that I'm acting. And they had these masks of sadness, happiness, or looking like, my God, you brought more Tupperware, that kind of expression. But they would hold up these masks, the persona. And now it's even, although that's not the way people necessarily use the term consistently, but personality is now like, well, it's some kind of mask. It's something that's socially necessary, that sometimes you have to tell people, yes, I like your new hat, when you're going to try and somebody else and say, God damn, it looks like somebody mugged Carmen Miranda's grave. But there is, besides that, there is this that's wired into the general system of people that they do think, they oftentimes say they do believe or they do feel, but they are made to think that there is kind of a floating atmosphere. Now not... Huh? Technical problems. Switch over to auxiliary power. I'm going to have to search for my exact word where I stopped. The feeling that there is something artificial about personality, not just the everyday, that we all have a certain personality, or we wouldn't recognize each other and you couldn't get along with people and you wouldn't know how your boss was going to act or your lover. But there is this feeling, as they call it, that there is something very often questionable about this whole operation, because this personality of mine at times does not seem to operate in my own best interest. And at times I feel like that it is almost a mask, or it is like this floating, instead of just my description of the dry brain floating around as a kind of charged and of course inescapable, it can't leave the wet sphere part of the brain. It's like this thing sort of hovers around me, and it's not all me. Now everybody feels some of that. Those working best in life's interest at the ordinary level feel very little of it. Those kind of people that seem to have life by the short hairs, which is of course vice versa. But those that seem to be quite content to jump up in the morning and play out life's game, which leaves most of you people out. It's not right or wrong, but most of you people are not so wired up. But other than those kind of people that seem to have no interest in introflexion, no questioning of themselves, their motives, and blah, 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 The run-of-the-mill, the middle class, the middle of the bell curve of everyone else, is this feeling periodically, spasmodically, always available. All it needs is just the right stimuli, and it comes out, and the feeling is that there is something having to do with my personality that just does not fit into what I am, which is a variation, I want you to see, it's a variation of I can't seem to properly express myself. But now they're saying I can't seem to really be what I am. Now it will not. This is not happening in life, but again I was trying to show you how even by its own games people overlook the way life operates through man, because that will not stand up to any sort of question. Not a hostile question, but it will not stand up to someone saying, I just can't seem to, sometimes, and like right now, I just can't seem to, I don't know, just be what I am. Because it cannot send a question like, well, all right, what is it that you'd like to be? And the answer would be, if you said that in a non-aggressive manner to someone, you said, well, all right, I find that of interest. I'm from another planet, or I've never heard that. And that's curious. What is it you want to be? I mean, only if I can help, or at least I'm just nosy. What is it you want to do right now that you say you just can't seem to do it? What is it you want to do? Because the answer is, well, I don't know, but I can't do it. Which is a variation of the dry part of the brain saying, I just can't seem to, I don't know, there's something I can't seem to put into words and express. It couldn't send the question like, well, what is it? Because you go, geez, I don't know. It could not send the question, and life is not wired up to someone to present the question, but also note internally, as always, the dialogue does not allow, is not arranged to where someone is even to themselves saying, or if they heard themselves say it out loud, I can't seem to express myself right now. The person never goes, well, that's curious. What is it I want to express I can't? Here's someone saying, sometimes I just feel like I could almost explode because there's something. I mean, it's my background, or it's my inhibitions. I just can't seem to sometimes be what I really want to be. And the person goes, well, that's curious. What is it I really want to be that I can't be? Never! Oh, now, no situation will happen that somebody would say, God, I wish I wasn't so shy. Two guys sitting around, or two girls, but two guys sitting. Said, boy, I wish I wasn't so shy, because that girl over there, the one I've been telling you I'd cough my arm for, that big tall, God, I wish I'd go over and talk to her. And his buddy might say, why don't you go do it? And you go, I can't do that. Now, I know all that, but I am talking beyond those specifics. That feeling, which is just a manifestation, a variation of the one I opened up with, the people saying, I can't seem to verbally, adequately express myself. You cannot stand the question that does not arise as to, what is it that you can't express? Maybe I can help. No one ever asks themselves that. Things are not arranged in such a way. The variation is, well, I can't seem to do. I can't seem to be. I just can't seem to do exactly what it is I want to do. Not some specific, like go over and talk to the girl. The thing of, it's kind of nebulous that, I don't know, I'm just irritated with life. I can't seem to, actually be myself. Well, what is this self that you can't seem to be? The question never comes up. You don't find that interesting? That no one, and everyone says it to some degree, in some variation, that at times I could just almost die because I mean, there's so much, there's things I want to do, things that I want to say, and I just can't do them. Well, what are these things? Would you mind your own damn business? And what are you, a smart aleck? What are these things? No one knows. No one knows that they don't know. No one finds it curious that they don't know. No one finds it curious that things are arranged to where everyone says, at least to themselves, that there are things that I can't say in words that I wish I could. There are things that I can't do in actions that I wish I could do. And no one ever says, well, what are these things? Well, I don't know. You don't find that interesting, that everybody feels as though there are things they can't say and do? And you say, well, what are they? Maybe I can help. Well, I don't know. I got to ask you again, you don't find that curious? You don't believe that there's some purpose involved with that? You don't believe You don't believe there's some intelligence operating? Now, I shouldn't keep asking rhetorical questions. I've told you enough before. It is a form, if nothing else, for you to start with, to see how things continually are churned up. How life is not stagnant. And what seems to be some of the vicissitudes of life and the uncertainties of life are the direct operations, these certainties, on a more complex level. Not just theoretically, it's right here. You're in the middle of it. It's in the middle of you. The wiring system is not normally arranged to where people have any knowledge of this. They're not supposed to. It's not important. If too many people did, if you want another side step again, if too many people did, and all other things stayed the same, which could not happen, but if people did and all other things stayed the same, then all the people who did, in a sense, would kind of step aside, at least for a while, and go, God, perhaps like this. I'll just give you one variation that those kind of people would kind of step aside and say, gee, God, that's fun to watch. I think I'll just get myself a hot dog and a beer and sit here for a while instead of being out there on the playing field, and I'm just going to watch. You would suddenly turn around and too many of the players would be off the field. They'd all be sitting over there going, wow. Seeing themselves and everybody else, seeing forward and backward history out there on the field, and going, wow. So, that is not the way things are arranged. Can you see also when people are saying that they're just things that they cannot do, that they want to do, and that they feel there's some kind of artificiality about their own personality, their own ego, any way they want to think about it, whatever they label it, you know what I'm referring to, that they feel at very specific times, sometimes very acutely, people who pass for sane, that this thing that I think of as me, that I don't particularly like its looks, I don't like the way my nose looks at a certain angle, I keep putting on weight, and I don't like I'm losing my hair, and I don't like that blah, 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 that I'm still middle class, that I'm still poor, I'm still in debt. All of that, and people can have the stimuli that the brain chemistry will specifically at times go, something is wrong with this, because this part of me that keeps saying that I wish I didn't look so bad, and I wish I wasn't overweight, and I wish I had a younger wife or a younger boyfriend, that ain't really me. It's some kind of artificiality. It's, you know, it's my upbringing. It's some kind of unconscious traumas I've suffered in the past that are now seeping out, and they keep me disturbed, they keep me upset, I can't sleep good, I'm under pressure, I'm going to get ulcers, I'm not happy like I see some other people, they just go through life and they work their ass off. And I hadn't been cursed, I'm not even religious, I don't believe that, but it's the artificiality, and they oftentimes say this, of contemporary life. But I got to tell you, they were saying that in Athens, several thousand years before we changed the calendar on them. That they were saying then that, well, the hurly-burly pace of Athenian life is such that we're all beginning now to live just kind of in the shadows of reality. We're just now artificial creatures. Think about that for a second. That life, the kind of energies going through man and the general body of life are such that as long as men have been men, that is, that they were talking, they got an intellect, as long as that's been going on, they have been saying that what they seem to be, at least on the surface, which of course is all they are, but they're saying that what they seem to be, they are convinced is not the real them. You would think somewhere, wouldn't you, just to be silly for a minute, that after 5,000 years, somebody back in the ordinary world, somebody on your planet would go, God, that's peculiar. You know, forget ideas. You know, Freud wasn't alive 5,000 years ago, so you can't ask him to help you. All the Western gods, they hadn't even shown up yet. But isn't it peculiar that humans everywhere have been saying, you know what I am, you know what I am. It's not the real me, and I don't like it. How is it that everybody on this planet has turned out to be not what they really are? We got to turn the tape over. Is everybody we know finally going to be an artist? Sure looks that way. I never told all of you what gets me is I like it all so much I keep wanting to take it down, except if I tell you all the stuff I like that you people did, I guess I'd finally have to get a double wide trailer. I'm not sure I really want to know, but you people who do stuff, you don't just take it down and go throw it away, do you? Well, anyway, you don't have to answer, but don't do it. If nothing else, let's try to store it around here. If you just kind of think to hell with it, you shouldn't. I shouldn't even have to tell you that. Anybody can do that, shouldn't throw it away. Anyway, you guys don't be throwing the stuff away. Are we back on? Do you see, after all the kind of maps and sketches and jokes and that sort I've made, you should be able to see, again, there is nowhere profitable that I'm going to stop and try and drive home some point as though this were an actual premise and there's a conclusion to this, where I am right now. But to see in general how this fits in, just at a three-dimensional level, just a little bit better than the average intelligence of you and everyone else, to see a kind of very efficient laboratory, petri dish, growing, bubbling by humans, one and all, that here they are, popes, presidents, prime ministers, famous writers, unfamous writers, people in house trailers, people in mansions, thinking, well, I'm not bad since I had my nose job and I lost some weight, but I'm glad I could afford all that stuff. But people look at themselves in the mirror or after some specific and go, something's still weird. I like my nose better, but this is not me. I have never been in touch with the real me. I don't know, I spent my whole life making a fortune, blah, blah, blah. Do you see, having all humans, to varying degrees, feel as though, all right, what I am, what I am more or less, it's not all that bad, but I'm going to tell you the truth. What I am is not actually what I am. Part of this is just some kind of artificial shell. It's just some kind of something I picked up, almost like a disease, or it's like a uniform that's been put on me, and it doesn't really fit. I know that sometimes it looks like it fits, and sometimes I seem to be successful in life, and blah. But I'm going to tell you what, inside I'm not really what I appear to be. Do you see? By now, can you just see, non-verbally even, I don't have to put it much more specifically in words, a kind of just exhilarating, it's just unbeknownst to three-dimensional consciousness, the kind of efficiency involved to keep things moving, to move energy, specifically amongst people. The kind of energy, at least on our planet, that is unique to man. The energy to continue to pass from human to human, going into all kinds of names of conflicts, agreements, love, hate, the whole spectrum of human experience. But the basis of it, or you can see without this, there would not be a human experience if humans suddenly all went, whatever it is I am, I suddenly struck me, whatever it is I am, forget the details, whatever it is I am, that's me, that's it. They would be somewhere, if not over the sidelines with the people I referred to earlier with the beer and the hot dogs, these people would wander off the field and never come back. Or else they'd lay down and probably just die there in the sun, just pass out from fun, or just ennui, self-neglect. There is a bonanza of just staggering efficiency in having all people to varying degrees really, you know it yourself, I'm not having to preach this, that to a large degree what you see, in fact to a large degree what I normally take me to be, I'm not. But this question will not, of course, stand up either. You can't say, all right, I hear what you're saying, so just between you and I, I'm just from out of town, so you can tell me I don't know anybody you know. What are you actually? You can't do that, because the answer again is, hell, I don't know. Well, if you don't know, see, if I'm going to go any further with this, then you say, well, how do you know that what you are, what you say that's kind of artificial you, how do you know that's not all there is to you? Leave me alone. I don't need some smart ass asking me questions like, sort of on a wider scale right quick, you could look at it as being more of a institutional or a sociological, that is, wider spread than individual phenomenon, besides the thing that in some way we develop individually these kind of artificial selves that's not really us. And it, of course, it seems to fit into the general flow of contemporary times. And I mean contemporary times whenever the time was. That at their time they always believed that we are more artificial than our forefathers were. That the more we seem to be living off the advances of our brains, that is, the more we have affected the environment, the more we've made the environment artificial. That in some way we would all be better off. Parts of the nervous system tell many, many people that right now we'd be better off in some way to get outside this damn room. Turn off that air conditioning. Turn off these lights. I mean, that kind of stuff bothers you. Take off these man-made materials in here. Stop all that. We'll go back to wearing cotton pads and living out in the swamps. Back like the gods intended. There's that feeling that we have created some kind of artificial environment, and in some way it's made us artificial. Right. Beyond that more individual level I started, there has been a kind of parallel cry that has gone out all this time, and it goes something like this: that just in general, man has over the last 5,000 years has suffered years and years of delusions about what he is, not just individually, but now mankind. That the history of mankind, look at it. How else can you explain the heights that the Greeks reached and then just blew it? Just almost as though they just wandered out and just pissed it away. And then you'd think, well, all right, we'll take that as the beginning of Western history, which, of course, to Western men is the beginning of history. That was bad enough. But then the Romans came along, picked up the pieces. Of course, that's where the average white band stole that neat song. But they picked up the pieces and now learned their lesson. Learned their lesson because they were right there as the golden empire of Greece collapsed. There they were. They picked up the gauntlet. Now, on to something else. Even like a good phoenix will even surpass what happened. And what happened? The damn Romans blew it. And in fact, I can make it sound worse. Not a history lesson, but I can make them sound even more apathetic, regressive, driven by stagnation. If that's not a new oxymoron, I could make their downfall even sound more questionable. And so you'd say, well, you're right. The history of man, not just individually, but these groups, the civilizations, the epochs of history, is nothing but just one damn delusion after another. That it's like people just get so good, or they reach a certain level, and delusion takes over. They begin to think they're gods. They begin to think that they're infallible. They begin to ignore the oppressive potential energies from without, enemies at the gate, nipping at their heels. That men, now, not, mankind, not individual men, but that mankind has suffered 5,000 years of delusions about what humanity is. All you have is collectively an awareness again of what I've been calling the dry brain, but it is, of course, a continuum. It is the continual gradual expansion of the human nervous system into the brain, and now you have it continually commenting more as an institutional mind, It may come out of one historian's mouth or one social critic's tongue at one time they say it, but it's an accepted fact. It's sometime in some place, that is, large groups, collections of those local realities, of those dry brains of large numbers of people at this time and place, then look back upon something that happened, and it is adjudicated to be a form and a downfall caused by this continuing delusions that men suffer, that they do not see what their true purpose should be on this planet. They do not see the proper mode of action. They do not have the wherewithal to continue to pursue proper modes of deed, thought, and action, etc. Again, what you have is an unbeknownst comment upon the fact that the dry brains, the collective dry intelligence of any era, has a crude awareness of the fact that of all the possibilities that we could have done, or this other group, if we want to turn it back to backward history, that this other group, and it of course is happening to them too right then, or they would not be studying the history or having awareness of it. But what they're saying is their brains are, if they were a little bit better, our brains right now, they're commenting and saying, cannot collectively even begin to see, to identify, to name, to classify, and then remember all of the uncountable, the in fact unimaginable alternatives that could happen, or looking backwards, that could have happened, which is the old game of if only. If only the Greeks, if only the Romans had taken more time, if only Western Europe, if only once they were involved with this hand-to-hand combat with the so-called travelers from the east flying down the steppes of Russia and overrunning. If only. What they're saying is there were possibilities that you can look back now and say, well, now I can specifically tell you, I can tell you 2 or 3 things by God, me and anybody, that would have saved the Roman Empire. Maybe not forever, but they certainly would not have fallen in the way and at the rapidity at which they did. Right? Anybody can do that. If they had only, blah, 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 if they had only stabilized their civil service and had taken more into account the dependence upon which they were relying of conquered peoples. If only. That kind of Monday Mac quarterbacking. But all they're doing without knowing it is that kind of dry area of human consciousness, that is the forefront of 3D consciousness, of 3D intelligence, is now admitting again tacitly it is not possible, individually, collectively, it is not possible for us, Western civilization, Greek civilization, Roman civilization, Chinese civilization. What they're saying is it is not possible, and that we tacitly know this part of the intelligence cannot begin to. Just silly to even talk about. But we can't begin to, if it could talk about it, to see all of the possibilities, all of the alternatives available right this second. Even turn around and look at backward history and say, all right, this and this and this and this would have changed the course of history. Now you can say that and I might go, yeah, theoretically that sounds good. But that wasn't all. You would not live long enough. You could not say, all right, these 4 or 5 things, or these 5 things, all right, these 6 things, all right, these 7 things. All right, these 7 things would have changed the speed at which the Roman Empire collapsed. And a lot of people, historians and good intelligent people go, that's correct. There's no doubt about that. Then, anybody, if I was going to push this non-existent scenario any further, then somebody else would have said, all right, wait a minute. Rather than those 8 things, I can name 8 more things that would have done it. In that same crowd, if they listen, I say, all right, you're right. So that makes 16. But then one of the other guys said, wait a minute. I can think of 16 more things. There is you cannot count the possibilities, the alternatives that could have happened. Bring it to what seems to be present day time. Ordinary intelligence, local intelligence, cannot begin to, and it has a crude awareness of it. It's why it comes out with ideas, I can't seem to say what I mean, I can't seem to do what I mean, and notions of spirits talking to me, notions of an unconscious mind, because it has the awareness that I cannot begin to see, name, classify, and remember all of the alternatives floating around down here. And the dry brain, ordinary intelligence, is not in any way wired up to see this, to speak in that way, to think in that way. You know that. You can. I know some of you can hear what I'm saying verbally, but your brain is not wired up in any way you would have never accidentally stumbled upon thinking that sentence. The brain is not wired up to think that. It thinks of alternative courses of actions in the same way that the group I was saying that could point out 8 and then 16 and then 32 things that would have changed the speed and the tempo at which the Roman Empire fell on its knees and went boom. Ordinary people can do that. But they take that as being some kind of definitive statement. They don't take it as being just one of uncountable, numbers unimaginable of things that could have happened. Because what does it matter? That is what did happen. That's the only thing that matters. Right? It's the only thing that matters in the 3D world. It's the only thing that can matter in the 3D world. Or the 3D world would be the madhouse and you would be sane. The observers would be standing still. Do you follow? That is, at all train stations, only the train would be sitting there. The station and the rest of the milieu, the rest of the environment, all that would move and the train would sit there. How about the old stories that all of you know? At least all of you must know it from the Old Testament, but they're all over this planet. That in some way right before history started, there are all these stories of these spirits, these gods, and they're always kind of hovering and floating around the orb Earth. And at some time in all the stories, not just the New Testament, I assure you, all over the world, and at one time, planet Earth was covered by what? Wetness. Serendipity at work again. And these spirits, these guides, the story is always that for some length of time, they float around and they look at this. And they seem to ponder, the stories go. They even ask themselves or each other, or they say out loud, what they might do with this kind of formlessness sense that we're used to. That is, it's waves. It's covered in water, and so you can't really get a fix on what it is. It's just there, and it's kind of sloshing around, and they keep floating around it and hovering and looking and pondering what they might do with it. Now you all know that story, at least from the Old Testament. Not being a biblical scholar, I admit I may be taking a few verbal liberties with Genesis, but I'm somewhere close because the stories are in the genes of man all over this planet. Can you see that there is a direct connection between that and my paradigm of drawing out the wet and the dry brain? That literally, although you don't have a wet and dry brain, you have the dry brain continues stirring over this incessant chemical kind of primeval oceanic sphere that is the next stage down behind where we are now intelligent or conscious. And you have, as it were, the dry brain, like a god, like a spirit, continues to hover over it, float around, and dreams, thinks of what it might actually be like if it could get down there and actually affect change in the genetic pool. That's what human life circa 1989 is all about. It's always been, but just to bring you up to date. That is what everything is about. Everything from primary to secondary reflections in contemporary life, no matter how cosmopolitan or how far removed it may seem from that. What you have is human intelligence, as though these good old gods of religions floating around this rather formless planet, covered in water, sloshing around. But all the stories they'll remember. But now, some of you, by the way, as an aside again, know why I bring out these stories is not to... Of course, any of you maybe on tape getting this some of the time in some other places don't know it yet. This got... I hate to even say it has nothing to do with religion, because that didn't even start to cover it. That only distracts you to make you think, well, why do you say that? Because if you normally say that, that means, well, somewhere it's got something to do with religion. All right, it doesn't have anything to do with Tupperware. Uh-oh, that means after he gets through talking tonight, they're going to try to sell us Tupperware. Because, why else would you say it got no relationship to Tupperware unless it does? You've been in the 3D world too long, my friends. You watch it. You've been saddled with 3D intelligence for far too long. It is. Truthfully, you can feel it. And it manifests itself everywhere, as I was going to say about the way in which the wet brain is related to the dry brain looking at it. But the reason I was going to say that sometimes I bring up these stories is things that seem to be so deep-rooted, things that seem to some ordinary people still that would believe the great cosmic manifestations and implications of gods, transcendental gods are outside this system that invented all this and created it. Can you see that those, it's not to make light, because if anybody needs it, they need it. And life still needs some of that, it wouldn't be going on. It's just that it has nothing to do with this, other than a minimal level. That those sorts of what seems to be more cosmic aspects are simply magnifications in a 3D world. They're projections. I don't know whether it's opaque or transparencies. But they're projections. They're right here in your own nervous system. Man didn't invent it. And to say it's a projection out there of that, it's also, you understand, a 3D world. It is that projecting in you. It's not that man made this up. But the stories are always beautiful once you begin to see it. You don't have to think, well, there's some poet somewhere that sat down, or some group of poets, and thought, let's metaphorically come up with an idea of creation. And one of them said, hey, well, I imagine that at first the planet was just covered in water. And one of them says, that makes sense, because even now 3/5 of the planet's covered in water. And one of them said, well, good, so they write that down. No one says, all right, my idea is that let's think of it, there's a god somewhere named, how about Hubert? No, Oswald. Well, we'll get a name later. Let's call him, just God. And they go, all right, that sounds good. And they say, well, and no one says, wait a minute, I got this idea. He makes this thing, and he decides first, I'll just make it, and I'll make it water. Because water seems to be, by then, humans have caught on that they've got to have water amongst all things. Water is important. Water will take you out before anything. That is a lack of it. So at first, the gods make this thing water. Now I'll go, that sounds good. That has a metaphorical content because water is so important. And one of them says, hey, even 80% of our body's water. And no one says, well, we don't know that until, somewhere in the 20th century. So they have to forget that. But at any rate, it seems right. Seems right. And then they say, and that guy says, well, I got this picture. All right, the god, or this group of gods, this committee, they did this, and they got this watery planet. But then one of them, or maybe a couple of them, they come down there and they float around it late at night. They get there by themselves, and they float up there, and they look, and they keep thinking, we should do something with this. It just seems to be just such a great potential. Let's do something. All right, and then, hey, well, they make land. They make some dry places. And then he makes some humans. They do all that. It seems right, but nobody sat down and figured that out. It is life talking. It is the nervous system talking, because that story is in you. And this is not metaphorical. That is the wet brain reality. But there is still a reality of that story, because human activity, the purpose of life, this is not the only one, as you know, because I've given you a whole bunch of views before, but this is an excellent and it is a valid description for the night. It is the dry brain floating around just like a spirit, just like a god, just like an extraterrestrial compared to the wet brain being, continuing to ponder, to look in amazement, although it has no words for this and not wired up to think about this. But some of you got to hear me because we're going around the tape. And it's like as though it sits there and it just marvels. Even though it can't think this, it thinks, if I could think this, it thinks, Jesus. if I could get down in there where it's got all possibilities, all alternatives, if I could actually just jump down in there and start taking that genetic pool that is me, if I could, even though I know I talk about me and everybody else about, yes, I'll change tomorrow, or I'm not the same person I used to be. On these quiet times when this spirit, when this dry-brained spirit is really in good shape and pondering like a good spirit should, it knows that all that is bullshit. What it thinks is, what if I could actually, not all that talk, if I actually could dive down there like the good old gods of my old stories and actually jump down there in that wet thing and move my genes around. That is life. That is a quite fair description of why humans are here and what your whole life is about. Although it may come out that you wish you had a bigger car, a better lover, a smaller nose, that you could lose weight, that you could put on weight, that you were healthier. It is as though. It's why you've got stories such as creation and Genesis and all these others. Is that own part of your own nervous system is as though it is a spirit, and it's pondering and just amazed, and at times delighted and other times frustrated to the point of suicide with some people, to think that there is every possibility known to me. And of course I don't even know that I know those possibilities, but there it is. And all this talk about change and how I could do better or how I've done worse, me and everybody else. What if I could just jump down in that pool and actually get in there, which is the only thing that can produce change, and I could actually get in there in my genes and go, even in September, that's life.